So hi everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm going to be talking about the Psychopomp, and I'm going to be talking about Psychopomps in mythology, their role in the afterlife, the biblical connection, Psychopomps in shamanism, soul stealing, why do we need Psychopomps anyway, what's the problem with the dead mingling with the living, getting stuck on the earth plane when we die and how to avoid it, and are we lost when it comes to understanding what happens when we die and how we can improve that. And let's start with what about the origins of the Psychopomp and what the term actually means. And the term Psychopomp actually comes from the ancient Greek, formed by two words, psyche and pompous. Psyche meaning the breath, and by implication the spirit, because that's what they believed the breath was. It was the person's spirit, and the rational and immortal soul of that person. And pompous is the conductor. So it's a conductor of the spirit, or the conductor of the soul. It struck me while I was putting this together, because there was there's been the idea of, which has been passed on for decades, about when you sneeze, people say gesundheit or bless you, whatever they say, and because they believe that the soul would leave the body when you sneezed, and if they gave you a blessing, it would protect you until the soul could find its way back. So now Psychopomps are present in many mythologies around the world. And because of this, the afterlife they guide the soul into is not always identical to other cultures, of course, but there are some common threads that show up about the passage into the afterlife. And not all who die leave the realm of the living easily, and these souls need help, the people who can get stuck here, who can get lost, or who can be attacked as well. So where are we? Psychopomps maintain, or death walkers maintain, the road of the dead. And you can see here that there's someone here who's died, and they're leaving their body and they're going down a tunnel. Not everyone goes down a tunnel as they're moving into the afterlife, but there does seem to be some sort of device that people so often move through to go to the next or to the dimension that we call the afterlife. And do you remember, some of you would have watched MASH, and one of those shows, it was of a soldier who had died, and he was suddenly in the afterlife realm, but he was stunned, shocked, and a bit lost. And he looked over to see other soldiers walking along a path just like this road here. And another soldier came up to him and said, "Just follow the others, go down the road, you'll be okay." And I was thinking about that while I was putting this together, and I thought, like Psychopomps don't have to be this big flashing being that arrives and says, "Come with me and I'll save you," and all this sort of, "I'll take you to where you need to go," etc. They can be very subtle, and they probably appear to us in a way that we actually need to see them, because a lot of people can be shocked when they die. So I just thought I'd point out the subtlety, or the subtle process that a psychopomp can use for an individual. Now, in Greek mythology, the psychopomps ensured the proper procession of the river of souls. So from the time people died to where they need to go to end up, at least until someone else takes over. So the River of Souls is a name given to the constant migration of mortal souls from the material plane. And esoteric teachings say that souls in their migration generally have little to fear on their journey, as they're watched over by powerful entities. from the various planes, and they protect us from those who would try to steal our souls. Which is interesting to me because we have this idea of soul stealing in a lot of cultures, and Indigenous cultures where they will, they will practice to protect people after they die, and while they're alive too. So if we go here, I was having a look in the Bible, being the past Bible student that I was, and in Matthew 10:28 it says, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Now, of course, hell is not what, fire and brimstone as the religions teach, some religions teach. Hell being Sheol and Hades, is a common grave of mankind. And you can see there what it is in Greek and Hebrew and Latin. Latin, it's infernus. And I remember when I was doing a Bible study that I think it was with, I did one with the Mormons, I did one with Jehovah's Witnesses, and then I did my own study. Oops, just letting someone in. And I found that, that hell was very different, along with to what we thought it was. And so was the word soul. It was used in many, many different ways. Yeah, where are we? So, and you can see here in these biblical references where it talks about in Ecclesiastes, when people die, they sleep in the grave until the time of judgment. And when people are dead, they have no thoughts or actions. In Acts, it says when Jesus Christ died, he was put into his tomb, but was not left in hell, which is the grave. His Father brought him back to life after 3 days and 3 nights. And in Revelation talks about death and the grave, or hell, as being eliminated, which is a very interesting idea. And in this image here, this painting actually, done in 1887 by Basnetsov, of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. In here we have the 4 horsemen on the different horses. So we have them on the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, and the pale horse. And biblical scholars sort of don't really know who this is, whether it's the Christ or the Antichrist or someone else. They don't seem to be able to agree on that. But this one they agree on is war. This one is famine. And then here we have death riding the pale horse. And you can see in this situation, like there's a war going on, there's lots of killing going on, but there's looks like angel wings in the background here. And up here is this really interesting animal, which it could be a lamb. So it could be like the Lamb of God, because it's got the gold emanation around the head, the halo, not the halo, but that emanation. There's an open book and there's a rainbow at the back. I actually didn't see that when I first looked at this painting. And then there's a red crescent moon down here. And I wouldn't be surprised if that actually represents a certain timing of this that some biblical scholars do understand. I certainly don't, but it's this guy here that we're sort of focusing on, death, the pale rider on the pale horse. And death acts as a psychopomp, because after all the killing is over, we have he comes up in the rear to collect the souls of the dead and take them to where they need to go. And that's the role of the psychopomp. And we have another illustration of that in this particular French journal dated 1912, showing the Grim Reaper here as with a scythe and wielding that. But the scythe that he wields symbolizes the weapon of the harvester or keeper of souls. It's believed that the entity escorts souls of the deceased to the unknown territory of life after death. And the Grim Reaper is considered a psychopomp who performs his duties of carrying souls of the dead to the world of the non-living. And just curiously, this happens to be, I thought you might find this ironic. This is a portrayal of the pandemic that was in the Balkan War. At that time, I think it was 1912. And in that pandemic, the Grim Reaper has come to pick up the souls of the dead. And I'm just wondering how much of that is going on right now. But hopefully, and just delivering souls to their rightful place. Now, we also have in mythology, we have Anku, who was the servant of death. And Anku is a Celtic psychopomp, and tales of his exploits are handed down in the folk tales of Brittany. And Anku also appears in Cornish and Norman French folklore. And here you can see I want to say engravings, but I don't mean that at all. But these portrayals of Anku in French buildings, ruins somewhere. I couldn't really actually get the name of that. But there are many tales involving Anku, who appears as a man or a skeleton wearing a cloak and wielding a scythe. And in some stories, he's described as a shadow. Oh. Just a couple of people coming back in, falling out, coming in. And he's atop a cart, which he uses for collecting the dead. And he's said to wear a black robe with a large hat, which conceals his face, which I find really interesting because beings wearing robes and hats often show up in the UFO subject. And people who report close encounters will sometimes report seeing beings like that, which as I've spoken, I've gave a presentation before about the aliens in the afterlife, and it did make me wonder, is there a connection to that here, which may have dated back to Anku? Anyway, we also have, where are we? Sharon. Oh, it looks like I've created a line there. I don't know how I did that. Oops. Anyway, Charon, as you know, is the ferryman of Hades. And in Greek mythology, he carried the souls of the newly deceased across the rivers Styx and Acheron that divided the world of the living from the world of the dead. And he wasn't exactly a psychopomp because he didn't ensure that the souls of the dead got to where they needed to go. He just merely took them from across the river, and then that was his job done. And then we have, I must see if I can get rid of that line. Can I? I'm not sure how I'm going to get rid of that. Just bear with me for a minute. Just going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint and no, looks like it's something that, what program are you in? Well, I'm using PowerPoint, but that comes up in when you screen share, and you can actually try Control Z and it's under. Okay, I shall go back to screen share first. And a bit of editing for you here, Barry. Sorry about that. Oh, it's disappeared. Well, there you go. Okay. Just like a computer, when it doesn't work, you turn it off and turn it back on. Okay, so we're back to here, rightio. Back to there, actually. So, oh no, we're on Mercury, rightio. So we have the Roman god Mercury, who served as the guide of the souls to the underworld as well. And curiously, we have Mercury in retrograde at the moment. So there's a lot of, because he was the god of commerce, trickery, and communication. So we'll be having problems with your, communications, whether it's phone or internet or anything. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. But he was one of the Roman psychopomps. And much of his personal mythology was based on the Greek god Hermes. I've got another image of him too. And Mercury's job was to guide souls upon death to Avernus, a crater in Italy, which was said to be the entrance to the Roman underworld. That's another depiction of Mercury, and there's Avernus. And one of Mercury's more famous transportees, originating solely from Roman mythology, was the beautiful nymph Larunda, with whom Mercury fell in love. And he, in fact, made love to her on the way to the underworld and sired 2 children. And I've put that in there because I'm going to talk about Midwayers. I have a little later, and I have spoken about them before, but they could be both physical and non-physical. And I'm wondering if those beings were actually, you know, some of the gods who had children with the daughters of men, or and some of the aliens that could be going on with too, or the Nephilim, you know, all those sorts of creatures. So we shall talk about that a bit more. And then we have, oh, this is Hermes. So you can see he's got the similar, he's got the winged hat, and like Mercury, and he's probably got the wings on his ankles there somewhere too. I'm not quite sure, can't really see that, but being the messengers going between worlds. So in this Etruscan tomb in Italy, you can see on the right there the goddess Vanth, who was a psychopomp as well. And she was around in the 4th century BC. And she's loosely linked to the Greek idea of Erinyes, called in Rome the Furies. And I'm sure you've heard about the Furies, who in war times would come down, and they would actually select those who had died and take them on to Valhalla. So we also have Freya as well. And Freya was most renowned of the Norse goddesses, and was in charge of love and fertility and battle and death. And in Scandinavian mythologies, both Freya and Odin were psychopomps. So they would also make sure that the dead got to where they needed to go. And they were a bit like the Furies too. They chose some of those who died bravely and guided them to feast in their halls until the end of time. And she was often depicted as riding a chariot drawn by cats. And that's why you can see the cats at her feet. It's all very fascinating, all these mythologies, I find. And Azrael, the angel of death, who features in Jewish and Christian mythology, but only really takes on the role of the psychopomp in Islamic mythology. And he's said to take every soul straight to Allah upon their death. Very interesting idea. And also the Berber men, they were once said to shave their heads but leave a single tuft so that Azrael could sort of swoop down and grab them by the tuft of the hair and take them off to where they needed to go after death. And I couldn't talk about psychopomps without bringing in the Egyptians. And Anubis was the jackal-headed god who was tasked with guiding souls to the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, or the Duat, or however you say it, where they would be judged according to their lives. And I actually gave a very deep presentation about the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and you can find that on our YouTube channel, on the Afterlife Discussions YouTube channel. But under Anubis's supervision, their hearts, which were believed by the Egyptians to contain their souls, they were weighed against the feather representing the truth. And if their heart was lighter than the feather, they were allowed to continue on. And if their heart was too heavy with sin, Anubis would give it to Ammit, this a demon known as the devourer of the dead, who would consume it. So you can see Ammit there on the left, waiting to eat up someone's heart. Now, while I was putting this together, I came across the Inuits, which I didn't know, I hadn't heard about their beliefs before. So some of their most interesting tales are about the dead. And a widely known Inuit concept of the afterlife, which I didn't know, was that departing people would be sent to a different world depending on their acts on Earth and the way in which they died. And in some parts of the Inuit homelands, the highest heaven is the Aurora, where people who died violent deaths could enjoy an other world of peace and plenty. And the Inuits, particularly of Hudson Bay in Canada, they have a traditional tale linking the aurora and the afterlife. And in their view, the aurora is the reflection of the spirits of the departed entering the land of the dead. I could see how that would be very comforting, because you'd be looking up at the lights, and every time they would sort of flash by and flicker on and waver around, you could be comforted thinking that it was the souls of your loved ones going to where they needed to go. And of course, spirit animals act as psychopomps too, and that's well known in shamanism, where they act as guides to the afterlife. And for example, in the Aztec culture, dogs were believed to help a dying owner in their last passage. Of course, at other times they would eat them. Those poor little chihuahuas, they would roast them and eat them. But other animals seen as psychopomps were some birds and wolves, and the horse that escorted its warrior to the other side. And what all psychopomps do, whether animal, natural or divine, what they have in common is they have a liminal quality. So they're undefined. They inhabit the spaces in between worlds and are often shapeshifters. And they also share a benevolent attitude towards the souls that they care for. Now, I've spoken about the Midwayers before. You'll find it on one of my presentations on the YouTube channel. But this is, the Midwayers are found in the Book of Urantia, and I find this a fascinating book. I was just going through it earlier and looking at the origins of it again. And it was around 1911 when William Slater and his wife, who were both physicians, they were contacted by their neighbour because her husband would go into trance, or into strange states at first. And then over time that progressed to trance states. But from what happened was, from 1911 to 1955, he was receiving information and acting like a medium, I guess you'd say. And all the information was put into the Book of Urantia. Now, Slater and his wife were held quite highly in their class, in the neighbourhood, in their locale, and the guy who actually channeled, call it channeled, the Urantia book, which came in spits and spurts over many years. He was actually a hard-nosed businessman. I actually think he was a banker, and I don't even know whether his name was ever published anywhere. But anyway, so the whole idea of the book and how it came about is very strange. But in the book, it talks about the Midwayers. And the Midwayers are beings that act like psychopomps, or they can be, and they can help. They're messengers between beings, between the physical realm, the material realm, and the non-physical realm. And the guy showed here is William Slater. He was the doctor who first became aware, and his wife, who became aware of the gentleman who was channeling this book. But the Midwayers can be both physical and non-physical, and that's how they are very useful, in that they can materialize in the physical world and then dematerialize and take information, carry information to other realms. But like I said, they can also carry the souls of people too. They've been called spirit teachers or spirit guides, but they are considered to be only partly spirit. And the claim is that they're descended from parents who are partly angelic, existing midway between the angelic and the mortal realms. They're supposed to be present on most worlds, on most material planets, being related to the mortals on that planet, but immortal and invisible to the mortal creatures. And they're dedicated in service to their mortal cousins until the planet attains an enlightened status, after which they're released to continue on to other realms. And midwayers exist in one or two orders, primary and secondary midwayers. And the primary midwayers were supposed to be born to a contingent of super beings about 500,000 years ago. And they're closer to the angelic orders and very hard for a mortal to perceive. And the secondary midwayers descended from the line of Adam, and they're closer to the mortals, being capable of manipulating the material things on the planet, including humans and animals. And I don't know about you, but my mind starts to tick over when I read about the midwayers, because I'm thinking this relates to the afterlife, it relates to the UFO phenomenon, the jinn, all the various beings in various cultures that can be seen by the people of that culture, but then they disappear, right? So midwayers start their spiritual progression the same as mortals and having a different connection to God or spirit, but the same challenges in personal development. So they have their own cycle of evolution, I guess you'd say. And on normal planets, they are very much in touch with the angels on those planets and also have their immortal parents with them to guide them. And there are similar midway creatures in other worlds and in other systems. And I don't know if any of you have had an experience with something that was there and then it wasn't there. But when we go to Q&A, you can certainly share that with the group. Oh, I have put it all there. I should have done that in the first place. But anyway, so basically just what I missed out was they're quick and reliable with communications. And also they act as planetary sentinels who patrol the invisible spirit realm and act as observers for all the numerous phenomena and types of communication that are important to the supernatural beings of the realm. And I think that's a really important function because, I think it's quite complex. Just like in this realm, life is complex in other realms too. So they need a lot of helpers, a lot of workers, and a lot of beings to perform different functions. But they have nothing to do with mediumship. They don't cause that. They don't interfere with that. But they do observe, that's for sure. So let's talk about shamans as psychopomps now. So the shamans are the human psychopomps. We've been talking about psychopomps in mythology, in the spirit world, but now we have humans who can go to those realms where those beings can ordinarily come here. The shaman, who often takes on the characteristics of their spiritual counterpart or animal totem, can act as the psychopomp. And not all shamans do the psychopomp work, where they help the dead or the people dying go through the dying process and then help them through to the afterlife. But they can accompany them so far in that other realm. Very early in the history of shamanism, shamans turned their attention to the stars, and primitive astrology became worldwide practice along with dream interpretation. But this was soon followed by the shamanic practice of communicating with the spirits of the dead. So the shaman journeys into the spirit worlds and acts in them. That's the other thing. They do things in those other realms too. The meaning, methods, and specific details of the shaman's work vary from culture to culture, but the core practices stay the same. They're a spirit helper, and for them, the worlds of spirit are clearly connected with the material one, very much so. And the role of the shaman is to find those connections, bridge them, and bring back power and knowledge to heal their community. But again, their other role can be also to find those bridges and take the spirit of the dead to the afterlife, basically. They use different techniques to enter their trance state in order to journey, and they can use drumming and rattling and meditation, sensory deprivation, rhythmic movement, or even dance, anything that entrains the mind so they can enter that altered state of consciousness and enter that realm. Let's go on to here. And when they enter those realms, they can communicate with all types of beings, whether they're human ancestors, whether they're animal spirits, and helpers of any kind, basically. They could even communicate with the Buddha, various sages, whoever shows up, really, and get information from those spirit helpers, or ask those spirit helpers for help to help them, the shaman, guide the soul of the dead to where they need to go. Now, there are many stories in the paranormal community that speak of the dead wanting to pass information on to the living. I'll just make sure I'm not leaving. Oh, first of all, sorry, I'll just back that up. And this is a painting of a shaman working with someone who's about to die. And in the painting on the left, you can see a red snake. In the background, you can see some spirit beings. And I think there is, in the middle between the shaman and the woman, there is a lion's face too. And on the left of the shaman down the bottom, there is a lioness's face. So all of these beings are around that person who is about to die, and brought in with the help of the shaman, but also because the person is about to die. And spirit comes, it has our back. It's had our back through this whole pandemic, actually, but it has our back all the time, but specifically at times when great things are occurring in our life, whether we're dying, whether we're being born, whether we're going through a lot of, we're having like a meltdown of some description, going through a divorce, or just in a terrible state of affairs, perhaps about to commit suicide. They can show up and they're there for us. And whether we, decide to help or not is to let them help is up to us, I suppose. But they are always there. So, right. And I just wanted to talk about, Robert Moss first. I've just ordered this book, The Dreamer's Book of the Dead. And Robert Moss is an Australian expat living over in California, or he was, I think he's still there. And he says in his book that we can move beyond the fear of death. We also can develop the skills to function as soul guides for others, helping the dying to approach the last stage of life with courage and grace, opening gates for their journeys beyond death, and even escorting them to the other side. And Robert himself has had a near-death experience when he was a child. I think he was about 8 years old. And that sort of took him on the shaman's path. And many people who become shamans or practice shamanic processes or teach shamanism, they've often had a near-death experience or a close encounter or some other strange experience which is beyond the range of normal human experience. That sort of acts as the catalyst for them to go onto that path. And Michael Harner, who's a well-known shamanic teacher of many, many years, he says psychopomp work is psychotherapy for the dead, because some of them have problems like we do in this world. And that's why they're stuck. They're hanging around because some of them get stuck here. I'll just stick on that for a minute. I just wanted to say that there are many stories in the paranormal community that speak of the dead wanting to pass information on to the living. And they want to tell someone who murdered them, tell family members where lost documents or family heirlooms are stashed, or ask someone to repay a financial debt they couldn't finalise before they died. Not only, there is so much interaction between the different realms that I don't think we really fully understand that. I know that paranormal researchers, investigators, they understand those things and they work with it. But I've seen a lot of people who perhaps do ghost hunting evenings, and they go there to observe, to try and catch, collect data to provide evidence that there is something going on here, that there really perhaps are the dead are communicating with the living. And I think that's true. But I think I'd like to see that progress further so that they would act as psychopomps and in some way and help the souls of the dead to actually resolve the reason why they're hanging around, you know, to move on. And I think Jem's joined us, so she might have something to say about that too when we go to Q&A. So Psychopomp work is not about invoking spirits of the dead. It's not about ghost hunting. It's not about haunted homes or black magic spells. It's about guiding the dead to where they need to go. But guess what? They still hang around. So why can't we leave the dead among the living? Why can't we live with them side by side? What's the problem with dead people being around the living? Well, I think there's a few. First of all, if they hang around, or if we can help them move on, it negates their suffering, and in however they may be suffering. And I think that discarnate beings who are still in the material plane, or as the shamans say, still stuck in the material world, in the middle world, they are distressed for one reason or another. I'm not going to name them all, but there will be reasons, you know, they're distressed and they, you know, or stuck in such emotional turmoil that they can't move on. But if they hang around, it also lengthens closure for the living. And for those people who've lost a loved one, and or they have people who, you know, like they're haunted, for example, and they may, like there was one lady that we were speaking to once who was talking about her father. Barry and I actually went out to do an investigation where she'd seen lights in the sky, and they came down in bushland, a whole suburban block of bushland that hadn't been developed yet. And she was also telling us about seeing her dead father. She walked into the living room one day and saw him sitting there, and gave her a hell of a fright. And there have been other people who had those types of experiences too. And she found it really difficult to communicate with him, because she said she was just too frightened. And she told him that if he wanted to communicate with her, to please do it in her dreams, which he did. But there are some people who wouldn't even think to do that. They wouldn't have that awareness. So people knocking around the house who are supposed to be dead, and you're suddenly seeing them, you're not getting that closure of those people being gone. You're still in some sort of embroiled emotionally in that whole situation. The dead that hang around can also cause unnecessary mental health care. So if what I was talking about before, if you take that further and it goes on for many years, people can really go a bit nuts from that whole thing. People who can't, you know, who don't know how to handle it, who have no background knowledge, or don't even know that there are people out there who could help them. It can also create social, marriage and family costs through hauntings and possessions. So if one person in a family can see the dead and the others can't, that can really put up a big barrier between family members in marriages, and, you know, in siblings and parents and children. And socially, people, you know, telling their friends, some friends or co-workers about their experiences, and they just think that they're nuts, you know, so that causes a lot of problems. So it causes havoc, which, as I've said in there in number 5. They can also cause more deaths. So, for example, if someone has died in a car accident, for example, and they haunt that area, and in the future other cars are driving down the highway and they see someone walking out across the road, and they might swerve to avoid them, well, they could actually end up being the cause of that car swerving off the road and the occupants dying themselves. So that's another problem that can happen. And they can also disrupt hospital procedures. And I have read of some cases, of anecdotal cases, where people have talked about being able to see the dead in the hospital, and they're just hanging around and they're playing with some of the equipment and all those sorts of things. And when they hang around, of course, the electrical sensitivity of the individuals who can see them can also affect the hospital equipment too. So there can be a problem there as well. And if we can get them to move on, it helps to heal the ancestral lines. So let's have a look at how soul stealing impacts our ancestral line. And I guess you could say the deeper you go into the mystery, the bigger the mystery gets. And I've just sort of, every time I do a presentation like this, I sort of dig around for ages in it, and I just go down lines of thought that I never thought about before. But in the West, we're so cut off from our ancestors, who Indigenous cultures also acknowledge as acting as our helping spirits. They help us when they're sick, and when we're sick, and when we're dying. And in shamanism, one of the reasons it's thought that the individual is ill is due to soul loss. And in shamanic cultures, soul loss can be caused by psychic stealing. And this was used as a form of psychic warfare by some shamans. And this is where shamans go into the invisible realms and pull, and I say that in inverted commas, pull on the essence of their enemies to disempower them, to weaken their essence, which actually sometimes led to the enemy's death. And in the past, there were no guns or bombs, of course, so they used this power to work against their enemies, and it's still going on today in psychic warfare and remote viewing and all those sorts of things. And many years ago, gosh, when I first started buying the Nexus magazine, Duncan Rhodes, the editor, was saying how, that various military bases, even then, were being reported by people that they were being psychically protected, guarded by people in their out-of-body states, so that the other people who were trying to get access through out-of-body states couldn't get in. And so that's going back quite a while. So that's been going on for a long time now. So in our Western culture, we can experience soul loss and soul stealing too. Now, we can do this unconsciously, and in India, soul stealing is recognised as psychic vampirism. And sometimes we even give up a piece of our souls voluntarily, and I find that particularly with women, or it's taken from us by others piece by piece. And one example of giving it up voluntarily by anyone actually is when we say, let me give up a piece of my soul to help you over and over and over and over and over again. And you end up in burnout, right? Because people keep taking our energy, and we feel like in the end that we have none left to give back to ourselves or to have for ourselves. So that's a form of soul loss and soul stealing. Or there's a situation with sibling jealousy where there's just, one-upmanship, and they're always putting the other person down, and that's also a form of stealing someone else's soul too. So soul stealing also happens in hospitals and restaurants. Therapists feel it too when clients can want a piece of our soul because they perceive us as empowered and they perceive themselves as disempowered. Or they give us a piece of their soul to take care of because they can't take care of it themselves. Governments can steal our soul, and I bet a few of you are starting to feel that for sure at the moment. Cults can steal our soul. Every time we cannot forgive another being, we are stealing a piece of their soul, and we become spiritually connected to them. And a lack of forgiveness takes from them, but it also takes from us. So that's why shamans hold ceremonies to return soul debts, because they say you cannot cross over to the spirit world at the point of death unless you release all stolen souls that you're carrying. Otherwise, you become an earthbound soul stuck in the world as a ghost or poltergeist. an interesting thought. So this could be another reason why the dead get stuck on the earth plane. They're still emotionally tied to their former lives, and this unresolved situation can impact our family line from that point if we have something unresolved like that going on. So everyone born after us will carry that debt until a family member breaks that connection. And every time we release a soul that we've stolen or had our soul returned that was stolen from us, we heal our whole ancestral line, and we heal the collective of the planet at the same time. And that's always a good thing. And if you think about epigenetics, how all our experiences, are passed on through our DNA. And I was reading something on a scientific website saying they've found that it carries on for 14 successive generations. So you can see how if we have, say, a poltergeist, and let's say that they are a family member who hasn't moved on, and they're hanging around us, and we don't work to help resolve that somehow, then in our children, that poltergeist, or whatever you want to call them, attaches itself to the next person and the next person and the next person. I'll come back to that one. And you can end up with what the Islamic cultures call a jinn in your family line. And these can be shadow creatures. They can be benevolent, but they can also be malevolent. And they can cause a lot of havoc and disruption in a family for generation after generation after generation. So I'll just go back to this one. So the shamans talk about being a hollow bone. If they're going to do any sort of psychopomp work, you have to get rid of your stories, the emotional baggage that you're carrying around. I'm not talking about you, but the shamans. It's good to get rid of our own baggage too, but they have to be completely hollow of any sort of emotional snares, any sort of karmic continuations, any sort of psychic connections, so that they can help those who are moving to the afterlife, and that they themselves, the shamans themselves, will not be contributing in any way, shape or form, to protecting the procession of that person who has just died to the afterlife. Okay, so let's just go on to the next one. And I just put this in here because I was watching something that Sandra Ingerman did. She was has been teaching shamanism for about 40 years. And please feel free to take a screen grab if you like that. And I just thought it was a really nice, she said this as a affirmation, or use it as a prayer for all of us, that we can use to do exactly what I just said, get rid of all that stuff that we need to get rid of, so that we do not bring these psychic connections to our family and to our lineage. And it's helped me clear any unhealthy connections that I have with anyone in my family that does not allow myself and members of my family and loved ones to be in their greatest health, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. And I thought it was just simple and an easy one to use. So at the current point in time, the idea of death is being reassessed. So let's talk about this in relation to that the process of death, and I did do a presentation last year or the year before, it's also up on the Afterlife Discussions YouTube channel, about, gosh, I can't remember his name now, it'll come to me in a minute, but he spoke about how the process of death can start 2 years prior to our actual death. And we can start to have dreams about family members. And as people got closer and closer to their death point, shall we say, then he noticed that studies had shown that their language started to change as well. They'd start to talk about going on journeys, packing their bags, any sort of travel wherever they're going to go. They'd also they could talk about seeing their deceased relatives. And actually, my mum, when she has dementia and she's in aged care now, but when probably about 6 months ago, she started telling me that she was having dreams of her mother and her father and other people in her family, and they were appearing to her. And she said it was very strange and disturbing. And she hadn't talked about having these sorts of dreams before, but there was the way she was talking about it as well. And I thought then this might be an indicator that within 2 years that she may no longer be with us. But these are the sorts of things that I think we all need to educate ourselves about. I just think I nearly got his name, Dr. Peter, is it Farnsworth? It might be, I'm not quite sure, but it'll be on the YouTube channel anyway. And we've lost connection with knowledge about death. Death has become too clinical in our Western medicine and in our society. We don't understand it. We're completely unprepared, I think, when we die, except for people who, like you perhaps, and me, who are interested in parapsychology and the paranormal, and educating ourselves more and more about death and the afterlife. So I think that, it's really important to discuss death more openly with people. And I've trying to re-educate myself to stop saying when so-and-so passed away. It seems like social etiquette, but they just died. They died. Dying is a thing that happens in society. And we need to celebrate death as a new phase of our existence. And I love funerals that are celebrations of life. I did that with my late husband. When he died, I asked everyone to please don't wear black, wear white or a light colour. And we had a lovely celebration of his life, and it was great. And one of my friends walked out of there and he said, I've never been to a funeral, and walked out inspired before. And I think that's what I really would like to see in our society, for people to feel closure, but also to feel that this is a normal part of our existence. And because of that, I think we need to create new rituals around death, or even start to create rituals around death in the Western world to help our children and our grandchildren understand it a bit more. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll catch you again later.